My name is James O. Artman. Grew up in Pennsylvania, small town in southwestern Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh. Graduated from Leechburg High School. Decided to go to forestry school and did so in 1927. The school was the Pennsylvania State Forest School, operated by the Pennsylvania Department of Forests and Waters. It was completely separate from Penn State. Its function was to train foresters for state service. And in the beginning, when it started in 1903, students were paid to go there and were obliged to work for the state when they graduated. But that was past history by the time I got there. Pennsylvania had just about all the foresters they needed. So it was just a regular forest school. My wife and I came to Tennessee in 1934 to work for Tennessee Valley Authority. And lived for a while in Knoxville, but moved in 1937 to Norris. The house we lived in was at 81 West Norris. And then Norris was a company town. TVA owned everything and ran everything. My rent was deducted from my paycheck. And when you needed something done around the house, you called the town office and they would send someone to take care of it. Then when the town was sold in 1948, we bought a house on Hilltop at 110, added 2 rooms and a basement to it, and moved in 1949. And we've been here ever since.
Excellent. Hey, I've got a question for you. You know, how did you hear about TVA back in, when, you were, I guess, finishing up forestry school, right? Your program. Did you get an undergraduate degree or did you get a master's or what?
Just a BS.
Okay. Well, how did you hear about TVA? I mean, obviously you needed a job.
Well,
You're already married, right?
Yeah. I got an application from a former graduate of Mont Alto, the forest school, who was 2 years ahead of me. He graduated in 29. And it turns out that 6 or 7 Mont Alto graduates ended up with TVA. George Gerhardt was Mont Alto. Jimmy Golden was Mont Alto. Art Zimmerman, I don't know if you ever knew him or not. Who else? Can't think of anybody else now. But that's how I heard about TVA. Of course, it was in the newspapers too.
Were there ads in the newspaper looking for foresters? Or?
No. Bill Darwin was the first forester employed by TVA. And I don't know how he got employed. I was superintendent of a CCC camp in Pennsylvania, northwestern Pennsylvania, when I accepted the job with TVA.
Why were you in Knoxville for 3 years before you came out here?
Well, their offices, forestry offices were in there then, originally.
When did they move into what we call the forestry building? Forestry offices?
Must have been about, see, we're in Knoxville. Must have been about 37, maybe. I commuted for a while, but not very long.
That was a hard commute, wasn't it?
No, not bad.
Really? How did you go?
Oh, we had a group. Freeway,
How long would it take?
25, 30 minutes.
That's not bad at all.
Yeah, we lived in Fountain City on the north end of Knoxville. Yeah, it wasn't bad. But living here was better.
Who was the director or some other people that might be involved in TVA forestry at that time?
Willis Baker was the director. As I say, Bill Darwin. George Gerhardt was here early. Ralph Vogenberger. Lou Klein.
Hey, Jim, what was your first impressions when you came out here and saw Norris for the first time? And was it already completed, or was it still in construction?
No, it was pretty well completed. All the houses were built. It was complete. Community building in Ridgeway, where you live now, was had a bunch of dormitories on both sides of the road. The only one of those left now is the Methodist Church. What do they call it? An annex. One burned down while we were here, and the rest were eventually torn down. And when we first came, there were some people still living in tents along Ridgeway, along that path that goes from West Norris over to the forestry building. And living here, I was close enough to walk to work and home to lunch. It was a great place to work.
What did you like about this area, and what did you find different about the Norris and East Tennessee area from where you'd grown up?
Wasn't too much different. I was living in the Allegheny Mountains up in Pennsylvania, and country's pretty much the same. A little warmer, of course, less snow. But I really like East Tennessee. It's a great place to live.
What were the challenges of the forestry department at that time? What type of issues were they trying to solve, or were they looking at?
Well, so far as forestry program was concerned, was getting fire under control primarily. Much of the state was still unprotected. Fire started and burned till it rained. TVA established 2 forest nurseries, and we planted millions of trees with the help of the Civilian Conservation Corps. And we tried to get people to do a better job of managing their forest land. Set up demonstrations with farmers and with larger industrial landowners.
Generally speaking, were those successful?
Yeah, yes. Not as successful as we would have liked to have had them. But I can remember land now which was just one gully after another, which is now pasture land or covered with trees.
Tell us about your family here. I know you had 3 sons. Were they all born here in Norris?
Yeah, no, Jimmy was born, the oldest was born in Knoxville, 1935. And then second one was in 1939 and 44. We spaced them 4 years apart, so we wouldn't have 2 in college at the same time. But that didn't work. They all took longer than 4 years to get through.
What was it like for a boy to grow up in a town like this?
Can't beat it.
Tell me about what made it great.
We just turn them loose during the day, and from here to the dam there's nothing but woods, and I think they've walked that many times. Nothing to worry about. No dangers. Because we had Chief McCamey to look after all of them. He single-handedly kept us safe from all crime.
What do you think about the concept of a planned community? I mean, Norris is unique in East Tennessee, pretty much, in that it's planned and it's self-contained. I'd like you to comment about that a little bit.
Well, it's a good idea, but a lot of people don't like it because they can't express their desires when it comes to fences, and the only restriction in Norris was front yard fences, and TVA was taken to court several times over fences and lost most of the cases. You can't zone for beauty's sake, apparently. But generally speaking, I'm in favor of zoning. I was chairman of the Planning Commission here in town for a long time.
Since you mentioned the town government, what else have you been involved in the realm of the government, city government?
Well,
City or post?
I've been on council for 2 terms, once before the town was sold and once after. The council back in the early days was just advisory to the town manager. TVA gave us $2,000 a year to spend as we saw fit, as long as they approved. And most, I think, as I remember, most of that money went back into the school system.
You said you served on Planning Commission. How many years, and what was going on in the Planning Commission at that time?
Well, I'd have to get my notes to find out, to remember how many years it was. Maybe 10. I can't remember, but it was a long time. We didn't have any big deals. The biggest problem I remember was one of the Dew brothers, Clyde, wanted to build a gas station down where he eventually built it, down at the intersection of 61 and 441. And we told him that he'd have to develop it as a mall, a larger unit than just a service station. and he made overtures to a large grocery store, which never developed. And he eventually built his gas station just like he wanted to. So that was kind of a failure at planning.
Jim, when you all first came out here, this was still a pretty remote part of the country in the early days.
Yeah.
When you came out to TVA. What did you find moving your family out here and starting to raise a family here? What was it that were the things that you liked the most about it? What were the most difficult aspects of it?
I can't remember any difficulties. It was all just great. I grew up in a small town, and this was just to my liking all the way.
Was there any animosity or difficulty with the county folks?
Well, sure. I think there probably still is. We were all from other parts of the country. We were foreigners to them. We tried our best to fit in, but never quite did. When county kids started coming to Norris to school, that solved a lot of the problems.
Speaking of that, can you tell us a little bit about what the school was like in those early days? I understand it was a federal school.
Yeah.
Can you tell me anything about
TVA operated the school like it operated everything else. And those were the days when they were beginning to talk progressive education. So our oldest son started to school when he was 2 years old, went to kindergarten, and the whole school was in that one building down there, which is now the middle school. From 2-year-olds to 12th graders, all in the same building.
What were some of the progressive types of things that they were doing with kids?
Well, they didn't teach spelling, for instance, and Jimmy still can't spell. And reading, they say, well, when they're ready to read, they'll start to read. Didn't teach reading. Teachers, I think, when the kids came to class in the morning, would say, what would you like to do today? And if they wanted to go on a field trip, they'd arrange a field trip. If they wanted to do something else, they'd do something else. But
that sounds like doesn't sound like you can get much of an education that way. Did your guys end up with a decent education?
Well, sure. They all three went to college, graduated. Jimmy was still is an airplane driver. He had 10 years in the military, and about 20 in commercial airlines, and then drove airplanes for industrial people.
Yeah.
What were the social activities that kids were involved in back then?
Well, we had Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts. Churches. And I guess that was about it. But they didn't lack for things to do.
What about the adults? What was their social life, social activities?
Well, we visited a lot with each other. bridge clubs then, just like there are now.
Were there things like dances and
Yeah. We had a big square dance club, which was active for a good many years.
What night would they do this? Was it a weekly thing, a monthly thing?
Once a month, I guess, maybe. We danced at the old community building and on a concrete tennis court down by the bank, where the bank is now.
How about the Little Theater? Did you participate?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was active when we moved here. I don't know when it started, but my first participation was in about 1940, maybe. I remember that my first play was a melodrama called The Curse of an Aching Heart, or Caught in a Spider's Web. I was a villain. Yeah.
Who were some of the other players in that?
That's too long
Too
ago.
long ago to
Too
remember.
long ago.
Right. Now, Sandy Brandt, your neighbor here.
Yeah.
He was pretty active.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about Sandy.
Sandy lived right across the street from us. He not only acted in plays, had roles in plays, but wrote plays. He wrote a couple. I was in one of them. That one was called A Little Learning, I think. A Little Learning. And then he wrote one for the youth Little Theater, and that was called, that was a political farce called Throw the Rascals Out. Was that it? Yeah.
how many plays were you involved in?
Every year.
What was your favorite?
About 20, I think.
What was your favorite?
Hard to say. Harvey, maybe. Sandy had the lead in Harvey.
What are some of the memories of just the Little Theater, the incidents that occurred, or some of the funny things that happened?
Well, most of the plays were performed in the old community building, and the makeup room was under the stage. And I have pleasant memories of sitting there letting the makeup people do me, changing my face. Yeah, those were really good times. Bid, my wife, I don't think she ever had a part in a play, but she was always involved with props or prompting. She used to like to say she was when somebody on stage picked up a telephone, she was on the other end of the phone.
So was the Little Theater a pretty major community event? I mean,
Oh.
obviously a lot of people participated.
Oh,
A lot of
yeah,
people came
yeah.
to it as well. Huh?
Yeah, we did 2 plays a year.
What time of the year did you do that?
One in the fall and one in the spring. Rehearsed about 6 weeks for each play.
How many nights a week would you rehearse? Or was that
I
different?
think toward the end every night. Yeah. Yeah.
Who were some of the other people that were involved in many of those?
Or were there any regulars? Were there any of your
Yeah,
compatriots that always participated? Sandy did, of course.
Yeah. names are Virginia Schultz, John Lane. I just can't remember.
That's okay. That's fine.
When did you get involved with the fire department, Jim?
Well, when the volunteer fire department was organized, right after the town was sold. Up until then, TVA, public safety, provided fire protection. So that would have been 1949.
How did the volunteer fire department get their equipment at that point?
We were donated the old fire truck that TVA had been using. It was on a Ford chassis. I can't remember the date, maybe how old that truck was. But it did not have a cab. You sat out in the open. The driver sat out in the open. It had a water tank, hoses, and a pump. Pretty basic. But fire was not a serious problem in this town. A few big buildings, but houses were spaced far enough apart so you couldn't lose but one house.